Good evening and welcome to Huckleberry Youth Program's virtual panel discussion, Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children in San Francisco, Identification, Prevention, and Response. I am Denise Coleman, Huckleberry's Director of Youth Justice, and I will be facilitating tonight's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me start by giving you a brief overview of HART. HART is Huckleberry's advocacy and response team. HART provides intensive programming for youth at risk for or experiencing commercial sexual exploitation, CSEC. Huckleberry collaborates with several City of San Francisco agencies to deliver a 24/7 coordinated rapid response, crisis intervention, and long-term case management to ensure youth are removed from harmful circumstances and find safer, more stable situations. That's a brief overview of HART. Now I would love to extend an invitation to our public. A large portion of Huckleberry's support comes through community partners like you. Please consider joining the Huckleberry family by making a 100% tax-deductible donation so that we may continue to provide essential services for youth experiencing commercial sexual exploitation. You can give by visiting www.huckleberryyouth.org or by texting HYP 71760. Let me repeat that. Texting HYP to 71760. Now we will introduce this illustrious panel that we have in front of us. We are so pleased to have this panel tonight. They are some of the most important service providers for commercially sexual exploited children in San Francisco. First, we'd like to welcome Carly Devlin, our own Carly Devlin, who is the director of HART. Carly has led the Huckleberry HART team since its inception in 2016. In addition to managing direct practice efforts, Carly has provided trainings to a variety of organizations and participated in city and statewide discussions around the issue of creating policies and programs to best support vulnerable youth. Our next panelist is Camille Bailey. Camille is FAM Program Director from Freedom Forward. Camille is a multifaceted advocate with over a decade of experience working with system-involved young people and families. She is director of the FAM, Family and Me, program at Freedom Forward, a pilot program designed to provide family-based care to youth who have experienced exploitation, including additional training and support for caregivers. And last but not least, Jennifer Daly, who is the senior attorney at Legal Services for Children. Jen is leading the Legal Service for Children's Advocacy for Commercial Sexual Exploitation Foster Youth Project. As part of this project, she is a member of the San Francisco CSEC Steering Committee and Prevention Workshop. Her work is centered on both direct representation of children and advocating for a broader policy change on behalf of foster youth. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. We will start by asking the question, what is CSEC? Carly, can you please start us in this discussion?
Yes, definitely. So thanks y'all for being here. So CSEC stands for the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. We sometimes hear young people themselves refer to CSEC, but in a lot of the work we do, we take a person-centered approach, and you may hear us saying youth experiencing commercial sexual exploitation as opposed to CSEC, and that's really to keep in mind that young people have, even if they are in vulnerable situations, if they are being trafficked or experiencing exploitation, that there's still a lot of other pieces of their lives going on, and we want to take, in our direct practice, a holistic view of young people and all the experiences they bring, including if they're experiencing exploitation or trafficking, but also a whole lot of other things as well. And that the work really does center around a whole young person and not simply the experience of exploitation or trafficking. So CSEC, the issue, it's occurs when a young person exchanges sex for anything of value, whether it be money, food, somewhere to stay, if they're under the age of 18. And there are many permutations of this that young people may be experiencing exploitation if they're being forced or coerced by someone who's known as a third-party trafficker or exploiter, or young people may be engaging in survival sex, which is when they have sex to get their basic needs met. And that there's a large range of experiences within that, and that one is a vulnerability for another. So it's kind of hard to disentangle the issue overall. But the idea being that young people, if they're either due to choice, circumstance, coercion, exchanging sex for something of value, that is sort of how we think about CSEC as an issue.
Did either one of you want to add to that description? No? All right, so let's talk about the factors that contribute to commercial sexual exploitation of children. We know that the majority of HART clients are youth of color and juvenile justice involved, as well as foster care system involvement. They have experienced sexual abuse and other traumas, are housing challenged or unstable housing, and or experienced mental health or substance use issues, all factors that can leave youth vulnerable to financial insecurities and exploitation. Can you all speak to additional factors and really what it is that where we find our young people exploiting themselves or allowing other people, more likely than not, to exploit them?
I mean, you covered the broad range of factors, but I just want to mention that I think that a lot of, I can speak to the kids in foster care. I think the foster care system is failing them on a lot of levels. And that's why they become vulnerable to CSEC. We have kids as young as 11 who are being the victims of exploitation because they have been in 25 homes, 25 group homes. They've been moved around so much. They don't have consistent social workers or therapists. So they have never dealt with their trauma or their attachment. So when an adult comes into their life, they're very vulnerable to being taken advantage of them. And so I do think that, of course, we're talking about system and non-system involved youth, but I do think that we need to look at the foster care system if we're going to prevent sexual exploitation of youth.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, Jen, the data on this topic is limited because this is an underground street economy, but most of the research that we have shows that 90% of young people who are exploited, sold for sex, have been involved with either child welfare or the probation system. So exactly what you said, Jen, our system is contributing to the vulnerabilities that traffickers are exploiting as a result. Up until recently, California relied a lot on congregate care, so group home settings for this population, and it was almost an automatic that if you were at risk or experiencing exploitation, you would be sent to a group home because it was thought that this professionalized level of care would keep you safe. Unfortunately, traffickers know where the group homes are. I used to run a group home specifically for this population, and we would have traffickers parked outside ready to approach our young people the second they walked out the door. So I'm very glad that California is moving towards a family-based model, and that's the big focus of FAM. However, that means we need more resource parents, and there's currently a shortage across the state of California. We're shutting down group homes, we're not sending kids out of state anymore, but they need somewhere safe to live. So it's really a call to the community to step up and provide homes and be resource parents, particularly for this population.
Thank you so much, Camille. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by a family-based model?
Yeah, so a family-based model means that the young person who is either in foster care or on probation with an out-of-home order is living in a family-based setting. So living in a traditional home or apartment where a family lives, as opposed to being in a institutionalized setting like a group home or we currently have some young people who are between placements. So they live at what's called the hub, or some counties use the term assessment center. So often they're sleeping on cots in the middle of a big room. There are some counties that are so lacking on resource homes that there are young people sleeping on the floors of social service buildings. So we believe that every young person in care deserves a family to love them and support them, whether that be family that they are already related to by blood or by chosen relationship, or by community folks who are stepping up and inviting these young people into their home. So family-based care refers to a young person living in a home with a family.
Thank you, Camille. Can we speak to the ages and the genders of the young people that you all have come in contact with?
Excuse me, I could speak to the work that and the youth that HART works with in terms of demographics. But I think to point out, just when we're collecting data and like what Camille was saying in terms of data being limited, the data is shaped by the biases we have about what it means for a young person to be exploited and who that might look like. So HART's clients are mostly young women of color. We work with some young people who identify and are trans, and young men as well. So there is a broad range of who's vulnerable to exploitation. And when we think about the issue, I really think about it as one of need and survival, and that folks and young people who are marginalized, then those vulnerabilities that marginalization creates can lead to someone stepping in and taking advantage of that. So that when we think about what is the profile or what does it look like and what are the demographics of someone who's exploited, I think the question we ask ourselves is what does marginalization look like, and what do these survival needs look like, and what demographics emerge from that picture. So whether it be marginalized by race or gender expression, sexual orientation, gender, and sex, just thinking, and immigration status, disability, these are all things that impact a young person's ability to negotiate the world and survive and access resources. So that's what the data really, in terms of what we see at HART, and also just knowing that young people impacted by these various systems that create, like Jen and Camille are saying, that systems that can create more vulnerability, it really ties us together. Do folks want to talk about the data or the systems level piece too, to touch on anything I missed?
I can throw in a couple data pieces. So the average age of exploitation right now, the data is telling us that it's about age 12. And often young people experience exploitation for several years before any adult in their life recognizes that this is happening. And we should also acknowledge that grooming usually starts way sooner. Like that's at times a multi-year process. Going back to Carly's point about folks who are marginalized or experiencing societal rejection or oppression, also want to toss in there that young folks of color are also subject to adultification as well as exoticism, and that further contributes to why we see that overrepresentation of young women and young men of color in this population.
Did you want to add anything, Jen?
You know, my experiences are more anecdotal. I can tell you just from the clients I represent, I'm seeing kids younger and younger in San Francisco, and it seems like it's starting at an earlier age.
Yeah, and I would just echo that with our data in terms of the youth we work with. One way that HART gets connected with young people is through child welfare's emergency response. And the calls that are coming in for young people through the emergency response tend to be on the younger side, the young people who are in the foster care system already. So these are sort of new kind of allegations or concerns that providers or mandated reporters or folks in the community may have about a young person. And I'd say our age range right now is 11 to 21 that we work with, and most of them being between the ages of like 13 to 16. So and a lot of the calls that do come in and that we get connected with our rapid response are for young people who are in that 16 and under side of things.
Can you speak to any of you why you think that is? Why are our young people getting younger and younger and being exposed to this trauma?
I think there's a lot of factors contributing to that. One, my guess would be social media. Young people have access to social media at younger and younger ages, and exploiters know how to use that. They are on pretty much any app you can imagine. They are in the messages and they are reaching out to young people. So it's really important for parents and caregivers to have honest conversations with their young people about who they're communicating with and all kinds of ways to keep themselves safe online, because there are lots of studies showing that, if you make a profile and you say that you're 14 or 12, it takes less than 10 minutes for an exploiter to message you and start that grooming process. So I think that's probably one of the contributors, as well as makeup and this Instagram look. A lot of young people are appearing older. So I wonder, this is not backed up by research, but I do wonder if that is also contributing to this lower age that we're seeing.
I also think I think the shifts in foster care, we are in a foster care crisis right now. So when the law changed where we're moving away from congregate care, we're still catching up with putting our energy and our resources into the foster care model and family-based settings. And I don't think we've really caught up yet. So a lot of group homes closed down. A lot of group homes have various ages. I have one youth who as a 12-year-old, went to a group home with other 18-year-old children who are already identified as being exploited. And when you put a vulnerable 11-year-old with an 18-year-old, you could all imagine what happens. So I do think that the foster care crisis is also contributing to the early age.
For those of you that are just joining us, this is Huckleberry Youth Program's Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. And we're talking to our panelists here, Camille Bailey from Freedom Forward, Carly Devlin, from Huckleberry, and Jennifer Daly from Legal Services for Children. I'm sure that there are people out there asking, how do I know? How am I able to identify who these young people are? It could be my own son or my own daughter or my niece or my grandchild. How do I know?
Yeah, I think that just a general theme in terms of approaching how can we recognize that this is going on for a young person? Really the issue of connectedness and disconnectedness, whether it be through like resources like school, or whether it be relationships in a young person's life, or whether it be access to something like medical care or a young person in the foster care system. Are they being disconnected from a placement or a place or a home? I think that what connectedness looks like for each young person is different, but if we approach it from the perspective of, is this young person just being disconnected by somebody, or maybe somebody? And when I do presentations too, something I often say is, a lot of times when we think about recognizing exploitation, it's not only what we see, but also what we don't see and what kind of questions we have. Maybe, where might this young person be going for a few days at a time? Who might this person that they're now friends with, or who they say their partner is? What might they, when they're out at night, like, do we know where they are? It's a question of connectedness and disconnectedness and signs of those things, and also a question of really what resources does a young person have access to as well, and thinking about what kind of resources, and not just I have school or I have food or I have clothing, but think about a young person in a holistic sense of, do they have supportive peers? Do they have caregivers? Do they have adults in their life? To really think about that from an expansive perspective, sort of what, like I was talking about earlier, young people who are involved in trafficking situations, they may, there's more going on to their lives than just trafficking. So how do we take a look at a young person's whole life and say, where are they connected? Where are they disconnected? And how does that show up for this one particular young person? And I know just I see it more now that I know the issue. I was in my neighborhood the other day and I saw a young person who was sitting on the sidewalk with all of her bags, smoking weed while somebody drove by in a car. And this is, in doing this work, I see a young person with their bags next to them. To me, I don't want to make assumptions, but youth in foster care, when they're leaving a foster care placement, take their bags, have 1 or 2 bags and leave, or they're waiting on the street for somebody. And in this kind of situation, because like I know the signs, I've done the work, I know a disconnection and what it actually looks like for a young person to be in this stage and to be taken advantage of, it was more clear to me.
I have a question, Carly. So I find, I'm not a clinician and I'm not in the mental health field, and both you guys are. When I started, I found that looking for the same triggers as domestic violence, looking for the same things, because a lot more of us are trained to see DV and have had more experience, and fewer people work with CSEC. And I feel like there are some mirrors that sometimes it mirrors domestic violence. And so you can think of it that way as well.
Absolutely, Jen. I think that's a really good way to help folks who are new to understanding CSEC, who might have some familiarity with domestic violence. So evidence of a controlling partner, someone who's, really tracking where they are and who they spend time with. Often it's an older partner, not always, but often. So if you have a teenager who's mentioning, their boyfriend who's in their 40s, that's, a questionable relationship for a lot of reasons. Another way that folks recognize that this is happening, like I mentioned earlier, often it goes undetected for a long time. And one of the first things folks notice is a young person is all of a sudden presenting with fancy clothes, or their nails and hair are done, and just exhibiting access to things that are not typically accessible to them. So that might indicate that there is an exploiter not only paying them off, but making sure that they look attractive so that they can sell them for sex. Less commonly well, actually, I don't want to say that, but another kind of stereotypical thing that folks say to look for is the use of tattoos or scarring as a way to brand young people. So, getting the tattoo of the name of your partner, often on your chest or on the back of your neck, can indicate that that person is claiming ownership over you.
Thank you all so much for those answers. And I wanted to invite the public to, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat and we'll try to get to them as much as possible. Following along that same line, Jennifer, of how do we know, how does this impact our young people legally? I mean, are they getting arrested? Are they being put into the juvenile probation system? And does that cause an even bigger problem for them? Can you speak to that for us, please?
Yeah, we've made a lot of great strides in that area. Was it 2015? I can't remember when the law was changed. So there's no longer any criminal, you can't be charged as a minor for being involved with exploitation. However, there are a lot of connected things crimes that kids get arrested for. I have to say, I can speak in San Francisco and Oakland. It's a very collaborative approach. If the courts find out that the child's the victim of exploitation, they really are working with the team and trying to provide services rather than, have them in the hall or, or even a lot of times the criminal charges are dropped, even if they're not for exploitation, but they're crimes connected to exploitation. So I've had over the past few years positive experiences, and I think it's going in a even every day it goes in a more positive direction.
Yeah, I want to add to that actually one of the tactics that some exploiters will use is putting a young person in a position where they will get arrested for a different crime to keep them in the probation system and therefore accessible to the exploiter.
Okay, so when you speak about crimes, what are we talking about? Like petty theft, robbery, things of that nature?
Yeah, theft, maybe being asked to hold a weapon for the partner or exploiter. A lot of young people that I've worked with have been arrested for disturbing the peace because they could not be charged with prostitution as a minor. So that was kind of a workaround that cops were using to still arrest these young people who actually are victims of a crime. So that change in that law now is really, really helping. And we're actually seeing more young people coming forward seeking support now that they know that they cannot be criminalized.
Thank you.
Denise, can I add one thing to this? This piece, just something that I want to just flag for folks, and this is something we've seen with a few HART clients, is around sort of this pathway from the foster care system into the juvenile justice system. And that even and I think this gets into sort of our societal biases around some of these things as well, that young people in the foster care system have experienced trauma by definition, that it was an active trauma that got them into the foster care system. And very often these trauma responses are criminalized. And I think that's something we can be thinking through. Also, for a fair number of youth we work with have touch points with the behavioral health system. So they may be 5150, put under a forced psychiatric hold due to mental health crises that are trauma responses. And this is just a trend that we see, and that young people who are in the foster care system as they get older may be exhibiting more signs of trauma and have more mental health crisis. And then at another point in time, what may happen is that these behaviors start to become criminalized as aggressive or assaultive. So just thinking that there is, and I know, and I would agree with Jen, there are a lot of folks, and I think San Francisco and Oakland are doing a good job of really trying to have charges dropped if young people are, if there's intersections with exploitation and trafficking, and also just the biases of, are we criminalizing trauma responses for young people, I think is something we need to be thinking about, especially when we're talking about young people of color who are impacted by the juvenile justice system and have touch points with that in a different way. Janet, did you have a hand? No? Okay.
You sure, Jen?
Oh, yeah, no, Carly covered it. Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to add one little piece. The trauma that young people who are in foster care or in an out-of-home placement under probation are experiencing is current and ongoing. Separation from your family, being removed from your family and your support system, that is a trauma, that is a loss. So I think it's important for folks to keep in mind that this trauma is not past tense. There probably likely were other traumas that happened in the past, but they're also in the midst of a current trauma. And so it's no surprise that they're having what we deem as a traumatic reaction. That's developmentally appropriate given the circumstances that they're facing. So I think there's really a big call on our system to shift how we penalize those behaviors, like Carly was saying, to not criminalize it and instead to understand and adapt and really meet young people where they're at.
Great. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat I would like to share with you all, and both of them are about schools and the partnership and trainings and interventions that are available in the schools for the teachers, and what other resources can educators use while their kids are there in the classrooms with them.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Camille.
I just wanted to offer one of the projects that Freedom Forward is launching or has launched is a website called wepreventtrafficking.org. And that has a ton of resources for parents, school staff, anybody who's interacting with young people. I mean, there's curricula, there's safety planning, there's guidance on how to communicate, as well as resources specifically for youth to access and learn. So got to plug that as a potential resource.
Specifically, are there the same kinds of resources for some of the social workers or therapists that may be in the schools? Same?
I think for social workers and therapists, being aware about this issue is absolutely important. So they can absolutely utilize the resources that are listed on that website, regardless of if you're a parent or a teacher or a mentor or CASA. Being familiar with the issue is important. There's also a lot of trainings coming up, especially for social workers and folks in professional roles, to understand the reporting requirements around this and ways to intervene appropriately. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different training resources.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry, Denise, my internet's a little behind.
That's okay. Go, Carly.
Something I would just say is that even though there are that adult relationships, whether they be teachers or social workers or school staff, are so key to being a strengthening factor for a young person, and that if a young person, that even if someone doesn't necessarily know the ins and outs of every intricacy of the issue, that showing up and being present and being there with a young person and asking questions too. I've worked with some young people, and if they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. But at the same time, some folks are like, yeah, like nobody asked me about this, or nobody said, like, there wasn't anyone who said like, hey, like, are you okay? Or like, hey, I see this, are you okay? And even just being an adult who asks a question and doesn't, and asks a question in the way of, you know, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but, you know, I just wanted to say, I noticed this, like, are you okay? Or is there something that, you know, there's anything you want to share? Just so we can be actively involved in young people's lives, and that it doesn't take not being a CSEC expert to be present and to show up with young people either. And I get a lot of requests for training, and folks sometimes are really overwhelmed, or really overwhelmed by this issue, or really overwhelmed by all the vulnerabilities and what it looks like. And something I always say to folks when I am doing trainings is that folks who are doing direct work with young people already have these relationships, and that's a huge strength. And then we already have things to draw upon in doing that work. And there's a base that we could improve our knowledge and learn more about it, and learn how to show up for young people. And also we're in that role already and showing up, and that's really important. And that also it's a collaborative effort to support a young person. So this is another thing I like to share too, is that we can connect a young person with a specific resource around trafficking or CSEC, but it's not going to be that one resource that's the thing that changes their trajectory. It's going to be a collaborative of folks coming together to change a young person and to support a young person in changing their trajectory too. I mean, I think that young people can make changes when they have the resources and the motivation and the readiness and those things aligning at the right time, and folks being ready to provide support, and the resources being put into place for when a young person is in the place where they're like, yeah, like I've got the motivation, I've got the resources, and this is the right time.
Speaking of resources, can you tell us the plethora of organizations that are you all are partnering with that are providing services for young people?
I just wanted to note on I'll start with one that is on the topic we were just talking about. So there is a multidisciplinary team in San Francisco where you can refer, if you're from the school district, you can refer a case if you're struggling, and there's a large team of CSEC specific providers who can sit down with you and discuss the case, including if you need police support and police support or HART or like legal help. There is a process in San Francisco to get that if you are a school social worker. And so if you refer to the CPS hotline, for example, they can refer you to that as well. And maybe Carly can talk about other pathways to that multidisciplinary team.
Yeah, if someone is interested, I'll put my email in here to everybody. That I can send out if someone is interested in bringing a case, I can connect you with the right person for that, who does the whole organization of the forms and whatnot. So.
Okay, great. And so another question from the chat. Do you have any advice for how to help providers compassionately understand kids who recruit other kids to CSEC involvement? I hear such anger at these kids.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Carly. Yeah, unfortunately, that is something that happens, and particularly in congregate care settings, kind of like Jennifer was alluding to earlier, when youth are together, there's a higher likeliness of, one bringing another person into the life, as we call it. I think understanding that these young people are trying to survive, and perhaps the person that's exploiting them is threatening them if they do not bring other people. So understanding that it's not a choice, they're being coerced, they're being forced, they're being threatened. and just trying to find the compassion that this is two young people or more who are seeking out support with each other, and yeah, they're just trying to survive the very real trauma that they're experiencing.
Yeah, and something I would add too is just that I worked with young people who bring other young people into this, because to them, this is how they are surviving and this is how they're getting their needs met. And to them, they're like, hey, I want to take care of this younger person and this is how I get my needs met. And I want to show her how she can get her needs met too. And even though as providers and adults, we can look in and say like, there's like exploitation and trafficking and differences in power going on, that to take a youth-centered perspective and to really see, well, how is this young person viewing their own life, and this one young people are viewing their lives in terms of what resources are available to me that I can use to get my needs met. And that often, a lot of the times when I've worked with youth who are recruiting, it's either because they're being forced or coerced into doing it by a trafficker, or because this is how they get their needs met and they want their friends to get their needs met too.
How can we, what do we say to people that are saying, these young kids have a choice. This is the choice that they're making. They don't want to do what their parents are telling them to do. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to do what they're supposed to do. What do you say to the naysayers that have no concept of an exploiter to our young people, but really do feel that kids are doing this on their own?
Yeah, I mean, I would want to have a conversation around what is choice, and what does choice really mean to a young person. What we have the legal definition, age, 18. What we're doing with age is trying to approximate power and control. And that's what our society is doing to approximate, like, okay, someone under the age of 18 doesn't have the power or the ability to consent. And that's what age is trying to capture power. Does this young person have all the information that they need to make an informed decision? And I think that's another piece of this too. Also, it's so interesting in this work, I've noticed that sometimes we treat young people like children, like small children, and sometimes we treat young people like they're adults and forget that there's this in between of adolescence. And I think there's that like education around what is adolescence and pre-adolescence, what is developmentally appropriate there, and how do we expect young people to behave, because that's what it means to grow up in the world. I think, and there's nothing like talking with a young person directly to get a better idea of what that looks like and really hearing their story, because as adults, I think providers, adults, anyone going into this, it's easy to forget developmentally where all of us were at when we were teenagers. And when I also think about this too, it's like when we're saying this young person has a choice as well, and it's their choice that they're doing XYZ, XYZ, XYZ. What is the XYZ? And like, if we're saying for a young person, the child welfare system, they're just running away from their foster home, their AWOL. Well, what is pushing a young person out of a placement? If they're a trans youth who's in a group home and is experiencing being made fun of by other young people or violence in the group home, that's a very legitimate reason for a young person to want to leave a place where they don't feel safe. If they have a trafficker who's outside the door, like Camille was saying, that's a reason why they may be pulled out. So I think really looking at the larger context is important here as well, in terms of thinking about what are these larger factors that beyond a young person. So what are the push and pull external factors that all of us experience when we're making decisions? And do we have the information? Do we have the resources? Where is our brain development at? These are all different, I think, considerations. I obviously would have a very long conversation with this person based on my answer. But I don't know, Jen or Camille, you all have anything you'd want to add?
Hard not to. I'm just going to say one thing. We all have for foster kids especially, we all have a collective responsibility to these kids. And if we're doing such an awful job that they're choosing a life that they're choosing, it is not an easy life these kids are living. And so I put it back on them about our responsibility to do better for these kids.
Absolutely, Jen. I want to echo that. What are they choosing this over? What's the other option? We have to provide positive, loving, caring options with relationship. That's what drives this, is relationship and connection. And it's become almost cliche to say, but so much of the research tells us that one caring adult can absolutely change the trajectory for a young person, whether they're in foster care or not. That connection and care and curiosity in their life is what can save these young people, for lack of a better phrase.
And as you speak, Camille, I see the passion and the compassion in your voice, and not only yours, but Jennifer's and Carly's too. And this has got to be extremely difficult work. One of the questions in the chat is, how do you separate yourself from the pain that you see?
This is an ongoing question. I think in doing this work for the amount of time I've done it, I have conviction in some phrases I just return to when things get hard that are like, this is my mantra of like, young people have the capacity to make decisions that are good for themselves. That's one of them. That young people have, like, with resources and access and support, young people can make the changes on their own terms. And so I have the things I go to when things get hard. I think also too, in doing this work, I'm a very hopeful person. And I also define change and growth and success. I think I've learned to define in a way that is really responsive to where young people are at and the realities of their lives. So I think that being able to say, I have a hope for this vision, but I also can realistically look at what's in front of me in terms of like our society and what young people may be experiencing, and say like, okay, how do we bring these two things closer together, and how do we inch towards this larger vision? And what do I tell myself at the end of the day when some really wild thing just happens that I will not get into? So
I call Carly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I remind myself is, the young people who are living this are so resilient and so inspiring. And if they can handle experiencing this, I can handle doing the work behind the scenes. And I feel responsible to do that work for them. And it's an honor to do it.
A follow-up question to that is, can you share a success story? And I understand you need to do that anecdotally, but I think it would be nice to share one or two with the public here. While you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to remind our guests that this is Huckleberry Youth Program's panel discussion on commercial sexual exploitation of children in San Francisco. And our panelists are Camille Bailey from Freedom Forward, Jennifer Daly from Legal Services for Children, and our own Carly Devlin, Huckleberry Youth Program's HART Program Director. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please share them in the chat.
It does seem like I'm avoiding the question, but I feel like we really have to define what success is by what our youth find is success to them. So, I have a kid who is able to, even though she's living on the streets and exploited, able to participate in an internship at De Anza College, even though she's in the midst of a lot of chaos. And that's a really big win for her. And there's a lot of these small wins, and our clients make steps all the time that they are very proud of and get their needs met outside of the exploiter, which, there's a lot of those stories. So I don't have one big story, but that's, what I think of.
Yeah. And I would even say that when I do the work and think about this, like, and with the folks I supervise too, we talk about steps, and I always say, like, it's not a small step, it's a first step. The first step can be like the most transformative step. And also that movement is not a linear process, that just because somebody had like what they would consider a transformative, amazing moment one day, then the next day they don't, and they're back in a place that doesn't feel good. That doesn't take away from the fact that that action and what they experienced the day before happened. And it happened once, and that it's possible for things to happen again. And things change so much in these young people's lives. And that, like Jen is saying too, there's that moment of how do young people define this for themselves, and also things that, and how do we meet them where they're at too. And I know that's an expression that's thrown around a lot in the world of social services and whatnot. And that really involves saying what's important to a young person, what's important to them, what do they want their life to look like? I mean, in our intake, we have a question of like, how do you imagine, like what's like the vision for your life? What do you want to see yourself doing? And we get the best answers to those questions, because young people, even if they're in a trafficking or exploitative situation, many of them, most of them, I've never met one who didn't have a dream and didn't have motivation to do it and move in that direction in moments in their lives too. And I've seen, you can all hear me now I'm talking enthusiastically about this, but I've seen change, I've seen growth, and it's really unique to each young person. I mean, so many of the things are even just something a young person says, they start thinking about something a little bit differently. I had one young person read me this letter that she wrote to her exploiter. She was super attached to him, a lot of trauma bonding, so she was very attached, trying to protect him. And she wrote this letter, and it started off with about like how much she loved him. And I've been working with her like as a therapist for a long time. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and listen to this, like gonna be here, I'll be present with her, I'll listen to this story about how much she loves this guy who I can see is taking advantage of her. And then she starts off doing all that and then meanders to this like other section of like, and because of you, I know what love isn't, and that was one of the most powerful like moments of just doing this work in general, is that to see like young people are able to like see things differently and do things differently. And that's just so powerful to see.
Thank you so much. Camille, I'm going to let you respond. And after your response, I want you to tell us more about FAM.
Okay. Well, what came to mind when you asked about a success story, I did think of a particular young person who I had the privilege of working with as her therapist. This was a few years ago. And she wanted a job, but like many foster youth, did not have access to her identification materials that are required here in the US to get a job. So having an ID, birth certificate, those kind of things that a lot of us take for granted, that our parents just have them in the file for us, she didn't have. And so that's one of the factors that drove her into the life. So after helping her to access those materials, she was able to get a job and stopped her engagement in commercial sex. And the big thing here was that her exploiter was a similarly aged peer who she had grown up with. And he saw her experiencing success and accessing these job opportunities. And he also wanted to get out, and he approached us and asked for help getting an internship and accessing employment. And so I still think back about that, and it really helps me remember that the often young men who are contributing to this and facilitating some of this exploitation are also in survival mode. So I think it can be hard to offer compassion to that side of the coin, but there are definitely young people on that side as well who are also vulnerable and being coerced into this life.
Thank you. Now tell us about FAM.
It is my great honor to talk about FAM. So FAM stands for Family and Me, and it is specifically designed to meet the needs of youth at risk or experiencing commercial sexual exploitation. The organization that I work for, Freedom Forward, did a lot of research and focus groups with young people in the foster care system and on probation who have experienced exploitation, as well as the resource parents who often care for them. And so one of the most exciting aspects of our model is shared caregiving. Our goal is to connect each young person with two families. So a primary residence where they live for the most part, and that's considered their primary caregiver, and then a secondary caregiver who serves a similar role that naturally presents in the world as an auntie or a grandma or a close family friend. So that's someone who's, coming over weekly for dinner, going shopping, getting coffee, really whatever to build that relationship. And then they provide a second place where that young person can go. A lot of these young people are used to bouncing around and being in transition. So let's provide positive options that are safe and loving. And that can be under positive context of, a planned weekend, or it could be a resource if there is conflict, maybe an argument with their primary caregiver and they just want to get out of the house. They have somewhere else they can go. So this really offers flexibility to youth as well as a break for caregivers. That was one of the top things that resource parents are asking for across the state is more respite support and just more flexibility. All of our caregivers, regardless of if they're primary or secondary, receive extensive training and ongoing support. Everyone receives 40 hours of training, 13 hours of which is dedicated specifically to commercial sexual exploitation and how to provide a trauma-informed and safe space for young people to, with time, move out of that and seek a situation where they can thrive. We also offer monthly groups for all of our caregivers to connect so they can build community, share challenges and brainstorm, as well as to celebrate those successes, because so many foster parents are isolated. There's a lot of limitations on what you can share about the young person in your care. So offering that community was a big ask that we heard from folks. Also, it's a really recent requirement, like this year, that caregivers and social workers are trained in the topic of CSEC. So that, has contributed to that failure that the system is having, that Jen mentioned earlier when we first started. We have built-in specialized services. We have case management, mental health, 24/7 crisis response, and we also have flexible discretionary funds to support both the creation of the home. So, maybe a caregiver really wants to step up, but doesn't have the space yet, but wants to move. We could help with a deposit or that, first month down. We can help furnish that apartment. We also can use the funding to support young people and accessing activities that they normally wouldn't get to access to in the system. A lot of young people, for example, can't attend prom because there's tickets and dresses are expensive, and often it takes weeks for your social worker to approve a check. So we will cover those costs to make sure that these young people have access to the activities and extracurriculars and connections and relationships that they so deserve. So yeah, that's FAM in a nutshell. And Carly, you know about FAM. Let me know, is there anything I missed that we should highlight?
Yeah. Camille, that was detailed, and you're the director, so I'm going to totally defer to you.
Okay.
And for those of you that would like to find out more about FAM and want to support and get involved, you can do so by going to the website www. Who does that anymore, right? Joinfam.org, okay, for more information. And as we are kind of wrapping things up, I think it's going to be important for people to know if they are in the company of a young person that they feel is being exploited, or might hear from one of their kids or friends that they know someone. What are the resources? Who should they call? Where should they go? How can they get in touch with a support system or people that can give them direction and information on what to do?
You want to take this one, Carly? Oh, Carly's having trouble.
Yeah, can you repeat that, Denise? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely. When people see a young person either being exploited, or they know through some of their own young people that a friend of theirs may be being exploited, what are their resources? Who should they call in that moment? Where can they send a young person to that might be looking for support and help around getting out of the life? So can you provide us with some resources?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, San Francisco has so many resources. I want to say, like, we are just in such a lucky place in terms of where we're at in terms of resources. I mean, we have a young person who like came to San Francisco to get out because she knew there were resources here in a different way than where she was. So I think that just is a testament to what's going on. I think there's this element of, if this person is a mandated reporter, that the suspicion of exploitation is a mandated report, and child welfare, and to call into the child abuse hotline, and that is a way that a response can get triggered. There's also the HART, our resources with HART.
You muted yourself, Carly.
Thank you. And so HART is a resource that is part of SF Soul as well. So Camille, I believe, just put that in the chat. And we serve young people, a collaborative in terms of placement and supportive wraparound services, and just a drop-in center called the Hype Center, which Camille is also putting in there as well. So these are all different resources. The Hype Center is a multi-service center and a drop-in. And man, this chat is intense. I'm trying to keep up with it.
You're doing fine.
Okay, there's lots of, let me direct you to the chat where there are lots of resources and websites. Jen, you want to take it?
No, I just, see, now I did not mean to raise my hand, but I will say that the HART program is amazing. Curly's not going to say that herself. In the last few years, it's been pivotal in so many of my clients' life, and the staff is awesome. And so HART is a great resource. I want to just note one thing. If you make a report on a youth, and the parents are doing everything they possibly can, it still can be a CPS case. It's the only thing in child welfare that the parent is not found neglectful if their child's being exploited. So don't be worried about getting a family in trouble by connecting with CPS in this situation. And the only way that I get involved normally is through the foster care system, but Legal Services for Children also does guardianships and helps youth who are involved in the life. We do immigration work, and we also do expulsion defense. So we do some of the school stuff. So we are also a resource if people need.
I want to plug SF Soul, which stands for, the SOUL stands for Safety, Opportunity, and Lifelong Relationships. And that's actually the collaborative, excuse me, that FAM is a part of, as well as the HYPE, the youth center that Carly mentioned. So if folks are referred to HART, we are connected with HART to funnel people into the services that SF Soul provides, which includes, specialized case management with HART. West Coast Children's Clinic offers mental health services. They have their Sea Change program, which is specifically focused around this population and really meeting them where they're at. The FAM program, we are partnered with an STRTP for youth who do need that higher level of care, because that does happen, as well as family finding and permanency support through our partners at Family Builders. And then of course the FAM program for youth who are in foster care or experiencing or out of home order under probation. The HYPE Center, I want to just flag, is a really awesome space in San Francisco. Like Carly said, youth can drop in. We're open Monday through Thursday, 1:30 to 5:30, and we're hoping to expand those hours as we come out of the pandemic, which has unfortunately put quite a damper on a lot of these services. But HYPE is specially designed for any young person who might have experienced exploitation, the street economy, foster care, probation, or just a young person who wants to access services. We have everything under one roof. We have mental health on site, legal clinics, showers, laundry, a clothing closet, just hangout space, somewhere to just be. All of that is available at HYPE, and HYPE stands for Helping Young People Elevate.
You all have been absolutely amazing. I am just so touched and inspired by the work that you do, and I can't wait to see what's coming off in the new year. It's not that far away. And if you are wanting to reach out to Carly, you can reach her at cdevlin@huckleberryyouth.org. And if you are looking to reach out to Jennifer, you can reach her at www.lsc-sf.org, Legal Services for Children, and you can also reach Camille at freedomforward.org. Thank you all so much. And if people are interested in ongoing support of the HART program, you can do so by texting HYP 71760. Again, text HYP to 71760. Thank you all so much. And I hope you all got as much information and advice and resources as I did. Have a really good night. Until next time.
Thank you.